He was just a homeless black man sleeping near a diner, ignored by everyone, even mocked by the staff. Then the cops showed up, cuffed him, and humiliated him in front of a crowd. But what they didn't know, he was a decorated veteran, and the godson of a 4-star general. And when that general made one phone call, the entire police department froze. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. This is one story you won't forget. The gray Chicago morning air was heavy with the smell of rain and exhaust fumes. It clung to the brick walls of the alley behind Rosa's diner, a damp, gritty blanket that settled over everything. Tucked away in a shallow alcove, a space between a dumpster and a stack of flattened cardboard boxes, a man named Jeremiah Cole was asleep. He was covered by a thin, worn-out blanket that had seen better days, a patchwork of military-grade wool and softer, donated fabric. To the world, he was invisible, a shape, a problem to be ignored. He didn't ask for anything, didn't bother anyone. He simply existed in the quiet margins of the city, a ghost haunting the edges of other people's busy lives. A few early morning customers, the regulars who came for Rosa's bitter coffee and greasy bacon, had noticed him over the past few weeks. Some felt a flicker of pity, others a spark of annoyance. Most felt nothing at all. They just walked past, their eyes fixed on the diner's welcoming yellow light, deliberately ignoring the man folded into the shadows. Chloe Ramirez, a waitress with tired eyes and a perpetually worried frown, saw him every morning when she arrived for her shift. She saw him not just as a shape, but as a person. She noticed that his small space was always neat. His few belongings, the blanket, a worn backpack, and a tattered book, were always arranged in a tidy, deliberate way. Sometimes she saw him sitting up, reading the book with a focused intensity that seemed out of place in the grimy alley. She had once left a cup of coffee on the ledge near his spot, and the next morning the empty cup was sitting neatly beside the dumpster, not tossed aside. It was a small thing, but it told her something important. It told her he had dignity. This morning, however, was different. The fragile piece of the alley was shattered by the crunch of heavy boots on loose gravel. Officer Brad Mason had arrived, his patrol car parked carelessly at the mouth of the alley, its lights still flashing, casting a sterile, rhythmic pulse of red and blue against the damp bricks. He wasn't from the regular neighborhood patrol. He was a floater, known for his aggressive style and his open contempt for the city's homeless population. He had received a call from a nervous business owner a block away about a suspicious man loitering, and he decided to sweep the entire area. For Mason, this wasn't about public safety, it was a form of street cleaning. He walked with a swagger, his hand resting on his service weapon, his eyes scanning the alley with a look of profound disgust. He spotted Jeremiah's bundled form immediately. There was no attempt to assess the situation, no call to see if the man was okay. There was only aggression. With the steel toe of his boot, Mason kicked Jeremiah's backpack. The bag skidded across the ground, its contents spilling out, a half-eaten sandwich, a small bottle of water, and the tattered book Chloe had seen him reading. It was a Bible. "Time to wake up, sunshine," Mason barked, his voice sharp and devoid of any human warmth. He nudged Jeremiah's shoulder hard with his foot. "Get up, on your feet. Now." Jeremiah stirred, not with a sudden jolt, but with the slow, weary reluctance of someone whose sleep is always shallow and whose waking hours are a constant battle. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the flashing lights and the imposing figure standing over him. He pushed himself up into a sitting position, his movements measured and deliberate. He didn't look angry or scared. He looked tired, deeply tired. "What's the problem, officer?" Jeremiah asked, his voice raspy from sleep, but steady. "You're the problem," Mason sneered, enjoying the small audience that had begun to gather at the end of the alley. A few customers from the diner and passers-by had stopped, their cell phones already emerging from their pockets. Public humiliation was part of the process for Mason. It was a tool to assert dominance. "I got a call about a vagrant causing trouble, and here you are. Let's see some ID." Jeremiah slowly shook his head. He looked at his spilled belongings, his eyes lingering for a moment on the open Bible lying on the wet pavement. "I don't have any ID on me," he said calmly. "I'm not bothering anyone. I'm just trying to get back on my feet." He paused, then added a detail he rarely shared, a piece of his past that he held onto like a secret prayer. "I'm a veteran." The word hung in the air for a moment, but to Officer Mason, It was nothing more than a pathetic ploy. He had heard it 100 times before. In his mind, every down-on-his-luck man on the street claimed to be a hero to get a handout or a moment of sympathy. Mason let out a short, derisive laugh. The sound was ugly and mocking. "Oh, a veteran, are you?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, as he played to the crowd. "Which war did you fight in, Grandpa? The war on sobriety?" Some people in the small crowd snickered nervously. Others just stared, their faces blank. "I'm not looking for trouble," Jeremiah repeated, his voice still level. He began to gather his things, his movements unhurried. He picked up his Bible and gently wiped the grime from its cover. Mason's patience, already thin, snapped. He saw Jeremiah's calmness, not as dignity, but as defiance. "I've had enough of this," he spat. "You're loitering, you're a public nuisance, and you're a liar." He grabbed Jeremiah by the arm, his fingers digging into the thin fabric of his jacket. "You're under arrest." Without another word, Mason twisted Jeremiah's arm behind his back with a brutal efficiency. He was rough, using far more force than necessary. He slammed Jeremiah against the cold brick wall of the diner. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was loud and final in the quiet morning air. Mason then shoved Jeremiah toward the patrol car, his hand on the back of Jeremiah's head, forcing him down. He pushed him against the vehicle's trunk, the metal groaning under the impact. Chloe Ramirez watched from the diner's back door, a dishcloth clutched in her hand. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of disbelief and outrage. She saw the whole thing. She saw the kick. She heard the mockery. She saw the unnecessary violence. And through it all, she saw Jeremiah's face. He never flinched. He never fought back. He never cried out. His body was being humiliated, but his eyes held a stillness, a profound and unbreakable calm that seemed to come from a place deep inside him. His dignity, though battered and bruised by the world, remained his own. It was a fortress officer Mason couldn't breach, and that fact, more than anything, seemed to make the officer even angrier. Chloe knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this was wrong, utterly and completely wrong. Chloe's feet felt like they were nailed to the floor. Every instinct screamed at her to stay quiet, to go back inside, to mind her own business. Her boss, Rosa, had a strict rule: never get involved with what happens on the street. It was bad for business. It was dangerous, but her heart was pounding a different rhythm, a frantic, insistent beat that said, "Do something. Say something." She watched Officer Mason pat Jeremiah down with performative roughness, clearly enjoying the power he wielded in front of the small, silent audience. The image of Jeremiah's calm face, the quiet dignity he maintained even as he was being publicly shamed, was burned into her mind. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Chloe pushed the diner's back door open and stepped into the alley. The cold air hit her face. Her voice, when it came out, was smaller than she wanted it to be. "Officer? Excuse me." Mason turned his head slowly, an annoyed expression twisting his features. He saw the young waitress in her stained apron, her hands trembling slightly. He immediately dismissed her as an irrelevant bleeding heart. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone flat and dismissive. "Please," Chloe began, her voice gaining a bit of strength as she took another step forward. "You don't have to do this. He wasn't doing anything wrong. I see him here almost every morning. He's quiet. He never asks for anything." She gestured toward the neat little space where Jeremiah had been sleeping. "He even cleans up the trash back here sometimes. I've seen him do it. And that book. He reads that Bible every day." Mason's face hardened. He saw her intervention not as a plea for compassion, but as a challenge to his authority. He sneered, a cruel, ugly curl of his lip. "Lady, do you have any idea who you're defending? He's probably a junkie looking for his next fix, or maybe he's casing the diner for a break-in. You should be thanking me." "No," Chloe insisted, her voice rising now, laced with frustration. "He's not like that. He's a good person. He told you he's a veteran. What if he's telling the truth?" The crowd was watching her now, their phones still up, recording this new development. The narrative was shifting, and Mason didn't like it. He took a menacing step toward her, his large frame blocking out the morning light. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You need to back off. Right now. This is official police business. You interfere, and I'll arrest you for obstruction of justice. Is that what you want?" Chloe froze. The threat was real. She could lose her job. She could get a criminal record. She looked past Mason's angry face to Jeremiah, who was now standing by the open door of the patrol car. He met her gaze, and for the first time he spoke to her directly. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension of the alley with surprising clarity. "Don't worry about me, miss," Jeremiah said. His tone wasn't one of defeat. It was one of reassurance. It was the voice of someone who was in control, even in chains. "Thank you for your kindness. But I've survived worse." The way he said it sent a shiver down Chloe's spine. It wasn't a boast or a complaint. It was a simple statement of fact. It was the kind of thing a man says when he has seen the very worst of the world and is no longer afraid of it. As he turned his head slightly, the pale morning light caught a faint silvery line on his temple, a scar, thin and old, that traced its way up into his hairline. It was a warrior's mark. In that instant, Chloe's suspicions solidified into certainty. This man was exactly who he said he was, and he was probably much more. Mason, oblivious to the quiet exchange, shoved Jeremiah roughly into the back seat of the patrol car. The door slammed shut with a deafening finality. Another officer had arrived as backup, and Mason turned to him, a smug grin spreading across his face. He felt victorious. He had asserted his dominance, cleared the alley, and put on a good show for the bystanders. "Can you believe the nerve of some of these guys?" Mason said to his partner, laughing as he walked toward the driver's side. "Comes out here, claims he's a war hero. Bet he thinks he's a general or something." The other officer chuckled, and the two of them got into the car. With a final flash of its lights, the patrol car pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street, leaving behind a silent alley, a stunned crowd, and a young waitress whose world had just been turned completely upside down. The holding cell at the 18th District Precinct was a cold, concrete box that smelled of stale sweat and disinfectant. The only furniture was a hard bench bolted to the wall. For Jeremiah Cole, the sterile quiet was a strange kind of relief after the noise and humiliation of the alley. He sat on the bench, his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. He was not a man in despair. He was a soldier in waiting. His mind, honed by years of training to find clarity in chaos, was already working, assessing, and planning. He closed his eyes, and the grey walls of the cell dissolved, replaced by the sun-scorched mountains of Afghanistan. The memory was vivid, almost real enough to taste the dust in the air. He was Master Sergeant Jeremiah Cole again, his uniform crisp despite the heat, his M4 rifle held with familiar ease. He was leading his squad on a patrol through a narrow, treacherous valley. He remembered the weight of responsibility, the lives of 12 men resting on his every decision. He remembered the sudden crack of a sniper's rifle from the ridge above, the way the sound echoed off the rock. He remembered the panic that flickered in the eyes of his youngest private, a kid barely 19 years old. But Jeremiah didn't feel panic. He felt a cold, sharp clarity. "Down," he had roared, his voice cutting through the fear. "Rodriguez, suppressive fire on that ridge. Miller, with me. We flank left." His commands were instant, precise. He moved with an economy of motion that was both beautiful and deadly. He was a tactical genius, a leader who inspired a fierce, unwavering loyalty in his men. His unit, under his command, was legendary. They were the ones sent on the missions no one else wanted, the ones who walked into fire and walked out again. They were one of the very few units that never lost a single man under his direct watch. It was a record he guarded with his soul. The memory shifted. He was in a different place now, a clean, air-conditioned office at Bagram Airfield. He was standing before a man with 4 stars on his collar, a man whose face was a roadmap of command and concern. General Douglas Hawthorne. The general wasn't just his commanding officer, he was Jeremiah's godfather, his father's best friend, the man who had been a constant guiding presence in his life since he was a boy. "You are, without a doubt, the most loyal and capable man I have ever had the privilege of commanding, Jeremiah," the general said, his voice rumbling with authority and affection. Your men would follow you into hell with smiles on their faces. Jeremiah had simply nodded, uncomfortable with the praise. I just bring my boys home, sir. That's the mission. The memory faded, leaving the bitter aftertaste of what came next. He was back in the cold holding cell. He reached inside his worn jacket, his fingers finding a small hidden pocket sewn into the lining. From it, he pulled a thin chain. Hanging from the chain was a single scuffed military dog tag. It wasn't one of the standard issue tags he was supposed to wear. It was a personal one, a memento. He held it in the palm of his hand, the metal cool against his skin. The fluorescent light from the ceiling glinted off the engraved letters. The camera of his mind zoomed in, reading the words he knew by heart. M. Such, Jeremiah Cole. He closed his eyes again, the final memory pushing its way to the surface. The day it all fell apart, it wasn't a bullet or a bomb that had taken him down. It was a lie. A failed intelligence report. A mission that went sideways based on bad information passed down from on high. The brass needed a scapegoat, a face to pin the failure on to protect a high-ranking official's career. His name was chosen. He was quietly and unofficially blamed, his reputation smeared in closed-door meetings. He was never formally charged, but he was told his career was over. He could fight it, create a scandal that would tarnish the institution he loved, or he could fall on his sword. Disillusioned, heartbroken, and without any remaining family, Jeremiah chose silence. He resigned his commission and walked away from the only life he had ever known. He didn't want to drag his godfather, General Hawthorne, into the mess, but he remembered the general's last words to him, a promise whispered with fierce intensity. This is wrong, son. What they're doing to you is a disgrace. But you're too honorable to fight it their way. I understand, but you listen to me. You are never alone. If you are ever in real trouble, I mean real trouble, you call me. I don't care where I am or what I'm doing. You call me. Jeremiah hadn't made that call. His pride wouldn't let him. For 2 years he had drifted, taking odd jobs, living on the margins, trying to find a new mission that never came. He had ended up on the streets, another forgotten soldier. But now, sitting in a police holding cell, arrested for the crime of being poor, something had shifted. This wasn't about a bureaucratic injustice anymore. This was about his fundamental dignity as a human being. This was about the sneer on Officer Mason's face, the laughter of the crowd, the feel of cold steel on his wrists. This, he thought, closing his fist around the dog tag, might finally be real trouble. The clatter of plates and the murmur of customer conversations at Rosa's diner felt distant and muted to Chloe. She moved through her shift in a fog, her hands performing the familiar tasks of refilling coffee cups and taking orders. But her mind was 1,000 miles away, stuck in that cold, grey alley. The image of Jeremiah being forced into the patrol car played on a loop behind her eyes. His quiet words, "I've survived worse," echoed in her ears. She couldn't shake the feeling of profound injustice, a foul taste in her mouth that had nothing to do with the diner's burnt coffee. During a brief lull in the lunch rush, she huddled in a back booth, pulling out her phone. Her fingers trembled as she typed "homeless veterans in Chicago" into the search bar. The screen filled with a heartbreaking mosaic of statistics, articles, and personal stories. She saw dozens of faces, men and women who had served their country only to be left behind, struggling with trauma, poverty, and a system that had failed them. She read about the high rates of PTSD, the difficulty of translating military skills to civilian life, the crushing weight of being invisible. Jeremiah wasn't just one man, he was a symbol of a national tragedy. "What are you moping about?" Rosa, the diner's owner, appeared at her table, a stack of menus in her hand. Rosa was a practical woman who had seen too much to be easily moved. "I saw what happened out back. You need to learn to let things go, Chloe." "But it wasn't right, Rosa," Chloe said, looking up, her eyes pleading. "That cop was a bully. And that man, he didn't do anything." Rosa sighed, her expression a mixture of sympathy and exasperation. "Listen to me, the world isn't a fairy tale. Cops have a tough job. Sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they're just jerks. But you can't get involved. It's not your fight. Don't stir up trouble. It'll only come back on you. Just drop it." Chloe wanted to listen. Dropping it would be the easy thing to do. It would be the safe thing to do. But she couldn't. The memory of Jeremiah's dignity in the face of Mason's cruelty had sparked something in her. A small, fierce flame of defiance. She thought of the video she had seen being filmed by one of the bystanders. She needed to do more than just watch. With her decision made, she found the bystander's post on a local social media page. The video was grainy and shaky, but it captured the raw ugliness of the moment. Mason's sneer, the rough way he handled Jeremiah, the final mocking joke he made to his partner. With a deep breath, Chloe shared the video to her own profile. She wrote a simple, powerful caption. "This happened this morning behind my work. This man said he was a veteran. Veteran or not, no one deserves to be treated like this by those who are supposed to protect us. This is not justice. This is cruelty." She hit post. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then a single like appeared. Then a share. Then a comment. Within an hour, it had 100 shares. Then 1,000. Her phone began to buzz incessantly with notifications. People were angry. They were disgusted. The video was going viral. As she scrolled through the flood of comments, a private message popped up at the top of her screen. It was from a user with a profile picture of a man in a desert camouflage uniform. The message was short and to the point. "I just saw your video. I know that man. That man's name is Jeremiah Cole. He was my master sergeant in Afghanistan. He saved my entire squad's life in Fallujah. He is a hero." Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Her hands started to shake. It was real. He wasn't lying. Jeremiah Cole. A hero. Stunned, she wrote back, asking for more information. The soldier replied quickly, sending her a link to an old news article about their unit. Another to a forgotten military forum where soldiers shared stories. Chloe fell down a rabbit hole of digital archives. She found photos of a younger Jeremiah Cole, his face serious and focused, surrounded by his men. She saw commendations, records of service, glowing testimonials from soldiers who called him the best leader they ever had. Her jaw dropped. This wasn't just a decorated soldier. This was a bona fide legend, a man whispered about with reverence and awe. How could a man like this end up homeless and forgotten in an alley? It didn't make sense. Her search eventually led her to an old Facebook page, a tribute page for a fallen soldier from Jeremiah's unit. Scrawled in the comments section from years ago was a post from the soldier's father, thanking people for their support. He mentioned that if anyone from the unit ever needed anything, they should never hesitate to reach out to General Douglas Hawthorne, who had been a rock for all the families, and right there, in plain text, was a phone number. Chloe stared at the number on her screen. A 4-star general. It seemed impossible. She was just a waitress. What could she possibly say? But then she thought of Jeremiah sitting in a cold cell, and Officer Mason, laughing as he drove away. Her fear was eclipsed by a surge of righteous anger. She copied the number, her fingers moving with a newfound sense of purpose. She stood up, walked to the quiet storeroom at the back of the diner, and with a heart pounding like a war drum, she pressed call. Back at the precinct, Officer Brad Mason was the hero of his own story. He strode through the squad room with a confident swagger, regaling his colleagues with the tale of his morning conquest. He painted himself as a proactive cop, a lone warrior cleaning up the city's streets one vagrant at a time. The arrest of Jeremiah Cole was not just another incident report for him. It was a trophy. "You should have seen this guy," Mason said, leaning against a detective's desk, a smirk playing on his lips. Classic case. Filthy, talking nonsense about being a war hero. I shut that down real quick. He mimicked the act of slapping handcuffs on someone. Bagged and tagged another homeless faker. Just another Tuesday. A few of his fellow officers, the ones who shared his cynical worldview, laughed along with him. They saw the homeless as a chronic annoyance, a stain on the city's image, and Mason's aggressive tactics as a necessary, if unglamorous, part of the job. They slapped him on the back, offering words of affirmation. "Good bust, Mason. Keep fighting the good fight." Mason soaked in the praise, his ego swelling with every compliment. He viewed the city's most vulnerable population with a deep, burning contempt. To him, they weren't people who had fallen on hard times. They were human garbage, a parasitic class that chose to live off the scraps of society. He truly believed he was performing a public service, that his actions were not just justified, but heroic. "Honestly," he said, lowering his voice in a conspiratorial tone. I ought to get a medal for what I do. You know how much paperwork I got to fill out for each one of these guys. But it's worth it to get them off the street, even for a few hours. Sends a message. Sitting at his desk in a small glass-walled office, overlooking the squad room, Lieutenant Eamon Yates watched the performance with a growing sense of unease. Yates was Mason's direct superior, a career cop with 2 decades on the force. He was a quiet, observant man who understood the complex politics of the department. He knew that officers like Mason, with their high arrest numbers and aggressive attitudes, were often seen as effective by the higher-ups, even if their methods were questionable. Yates said nothing, but he made a mental note of the incident. Mason's arrogance had always bothered him. It was a liability, a ticking time bomb of a complaint or a lawsuit waiting to happen. Just then, another officer called out from across the room. "Hey Mason, you're famous." He turned his computer monitor around, showing the social media page where Chloe's video was now exploding. The view count was climbing into the tens of thousands. Mason strolled over, a confident grin on his face. He watched the shaky footage of himself, but he didn't see brutality. He saw strength. He saw himself as the calm, authoritative figure in a chaotic situation. He read some of the angry comments aloud, his voice dripping with mockery. "This is police brutality. He's a monster." Mason laughed, a loud booming sound that filled the room. "Oh, boo-hoo. Look at all the little snowflakes crying over a bum." He pointed to Chloe in the video. "And look at this little waitress. Trying to be a hero. What does she know? She'll cry for likes and get 1,000 comments from her friends, but at the end of the day she'll still be slinging hash for minimum wage, and I'll still be the one wearing the badge. Nothing is going to happen." He truly believed it. In his world, there were 2 kinds of people, those with power and those without. He had a badge, a gun, and the weight of the entire justice system behind him. Jeremiah Cole had nothing. Chloe Ramirez had nothing. In Mason's mind, the outcome was already decided. He was untouchable. The arrogance hung thick in the air and a blinding fog that prevented him from seeing the cliff edge he was gleefully marching toward. Lieutenant Yates watched him, a knot tightening in his stomach. He had a bad feeling about this, a very bad feeling. General Douglas Hawthorne, U.S. Army, retired, sat in the leather-bound chair of his study, surrounded by the quiet relics of a storied career. The walls were adorned with framed photographs of him, with presidents, foreign dignitaries, and rows of young soldiers. His 4-star flag stood proudly in the corner. Though he was now in his late 60s, he still possessed an aura of command that could silence a room. His retirement was a mere formality. His influence still echoed through the highest echelons of the Pentagon and Washington. He was a man who traded in power and loyalty, and he was deeply respected, and perhaps a little feared, by all who knew him. He was reading a biography of General Grant when his private phone line buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. A Chicago area code. He almost ignored it, but some instinct, a commander's intuition that had saved his life more than once, made him pick it up. "Hawthorne," he answered, his voice a low rumble. On the other end of the line, he heard the nervous, hesitant voice of a young woman. Hello? Is this General Hawthorne?" "It is," he said, his tone softening slightly. "To whom am I speaking?" "My name is Chloe Ramirez, sir. I'm sorry to bother you. I know this is probably a crazy long shot, but I found your number online. I'm a waitress in Chicago, and something happened today." Chloe, her voice trembling but determined, recounted the entire story. She told him about the quiet man who slept in the alley, the brutal arrest by Officer Mason, the mocking words, the handcuffs. She told him the man had claimed to be a veteran. The general listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He had received calls like this before from well-meaning civilians. "I appreciate your concern, young lady," he said politely, when she finished. "There are many veterans who have fallen on hard times. It's a national shame. But there's more, sir," Chloe pressed, her voice gaining urgency. "Another soldier contacted me. He saw the video I posted. He said he knew him. He said the man's name is Jeremiah Cole." The name hit the general like a physical blow. The air in the quiet study suddenly felt thick and heavy. A profound, dead silence fell over the line. For a full 5 seconds, Douglas Hawthorne said nothing. The world seemed to stop. Chloe thought the line had been disconnected. Then his voice came back, and it was completely transformed. The polite, retired gentleman was gone. In his place was the 4-star general, the commander of armies. His voice was cold, sharp, and lethal. "Where is he?" They took him to the 18th District Precinct, I think," Chloe stammered, taken aback by the sudden shift. "Send me the video," Hawthorne commanded. "Now." Chloe quickly texted him the link. In his study, the general opened the file on his tablet. He watched the grainy footage. He saw the alley. He saw Officer Mason kick the bag. He saw the sneer, heard the insults, and then he saw them. He saw the hands of this arrogant, worthless street cop put Jeremiah Cole, his godson, in handcuffs. He saw them slam him against the car. A stillness fell over the general. It was the same terrifying calm that always preceded a storm. His face, usually set in a stern but kind expression, hardened into a mask of cold fury. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of his desk. He whispered the words to the empty room, his voice barely audible but shaking with a rage that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. They put cuffs on Jeremiah Cole. He didn't waste another second. He didn't call the 18th District Precinct. He didn't call the Chicago police chief. That was not how power worked. You don't start at the bottom of the chain of command. You start at the top, and you let the pressure roll downhill like an avalanche. His finger jabbed a number on his secure speed dial. It was a direct line to a personal cell phone on a desk in Arlington, Virginia. "Arthur," the general said when the call was answered. There were no pleasantries. "It's Douglas Hawthorne." On the other end of the line was the Secretary of Defense. "Doug, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "I have a situation," the general said, his voice dangerously level. "A decorated master sergeant, one of the finest soldiers I have ever known, was arrested this morning in Chicago. He was unarmed, non-violent, and homeless. He was assaulted and publicly humiliated by a local police officer. His name is Jeremiah Cole." He paused, letting the name and the rank sink in. "I am looking at the video right now. It is an absolute disgrace to every man and woman who has ever worn a uniform. I want his immediate and unconditional release, and I want a full and transparent inquiry into the conduct of the arresting officer. Not later. Now." The Secretary of Defense didn't hesitate. He knew General Hawthorne. He knew that when he used that tone of voice, the world rearranged itself to his will. "Consider it done, Doug. I'll make the call myself." "Where is he being held?" 18th District, the general said. "Thank you, Arthur." He hung up the phone. The first wheel had been turned. A formal inquiry from the Department of Defense to a local police precinct was not just unusual. It was a bombshell. Local and state officials would be scrambling. The pressure would be immense. But Douglas Hawthorne wasn't finished. He made one more call, this time to a private air charter service he kept on retainer. "Have the jet ready in 30 minutes, he said. "Flight plan for Chicago." He stood up and walked over to a glass case on the wall. Inside, among his own medals, was a photograph of a younger Jeremiah, smiling, standing next to a proud-looking man in an army uniform, Jeremiah's father. "I'm coming, son," the general whispered to the photograph. "I'm coming." The afternoon shift at the 18th District Precinct had started out like any other. The air was stale with the smell of old coffee and paperwork. Phones rang with the mundane rhythm of urban life, minor thefts, noise complaints, fender benders. Then the first call came. It wasn't to the front desk. It was a direct call to the precinct commander's private line, a call from the office of the Chicago police superintendent. The commander, a man used to wielding authority, was suddenly on the receiving end of a very tense, one-sided conversation. He stood up straighter. His face grew pale. He started saying "yes, sir," and "right away, sir," repeatedly. When he hung up, he burst out of his office, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. "Yates," he yelled across the squad room. "My office. Now." Lieutenant Evan Yates, who had been stewing over Mason's arrogance all day, felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. He knew, instinctively, that this was about the arrest in the alley. He walked into the commander's office, and the door was slammed shut behind him. What in God's name happened this morning with that homeless arrest? the commander demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. I just got off the phone with the superintendent himself. He had just gotten off the phone with the mayor's office. The mayor's office had just gotten a call from the governor, and the governor got a call from a 3-letter agency in Washington, D.C. that I don't even want to say out loud. They are telling me to release the homeless vet you have in holding, not request, not advise. They are ordering his immediate release. He stared at Yates, his eyes wide with a mixture of anger and fear. What did you people do? Before Yates could even formulate an answer, the commander's desk phone rang again. He snatched it up. Commander Davies, he barked. He listened for a moment, and all the remaining color drained from his face. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Yes, he whispered. Yes, I understand. He's on his way. He hung up the phone, his hand trembling. He looked at Yates, his expression one of pure horror. That was the Department of Defense liaison. They are launching a formal inquiry into a civil rights violation against a decorated Master Sergeant, and General Douglas Hawthorne is on a private jet, flying here to Chicago. He is coming here. Yates felt his blood run cold. He knew the name. Every officer above the rank of sergeant knew the name. General Hawthorne wasn't just some retired military man. He was a living legend, a political powerhouse, a man who could end careers with a single phone call, and he was Jeremiah Cole's godfather. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in Yates's mind with sickening clarity. Get Mason in here, the commander ordered, his voice barely a squeak. Yates found Officer Mason laughing with a colleague by the coffee machine. Mason, the commander wants to see you. Now. Mason sauntered toward the office, still blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over his head. He walked in with a confident smirk. You wanted to see me, Commander? Mason, what did you do? Yates asked, his voice low and intense. I did my job, Mason said, his smugness still intact. I arrested a belligerent transient who was lying about being a soldier. His name, Yates interrupted, his voice cutting like glass, is Master Sergeant Jeremiah Cole. And his godfather just called the Secretary of Defense. He let the words hang in the air. Mason's smirk faltered. He blinked, confused. What are you talking about? Godfather. Yates leaned in close, his patience gone. General Douglas Hawthorne. The name hit Mason like a freight train. He stumbled back a step, his face contorting in disbelief and dawning terror. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a sickly pale sheen of sweat. You mean that Hawthorne, the 4-star? It was a question, but it sounded like a plea. Release Sergeant Cole immediately, the commander ordered Yates, his voice shaking. With a full apology, escort him to the front. His people are on their way to pick him up. To Mason, he just pointed a trembling finger at a chair. You, sit, and shut your mouth. Mason collapsed into the chair, his mind reeling. He started to stammer, to deflect. This is insane. It's a setup. That waitress, she must have faked some documents. The guy's a nobody. He's homeless. But no one was listening anymore. His words were the pathetic, desperate squeals of a man who had just realized his entire world was collapsing around him. The system he had so arrogantly wielded was now turning against him with terrifying speed and force. Meanwhile, Chloe's phone rang. It was an official-sounding woman from the mayor's office. She was politely but firmly asked if she would be willing to come to City Hall to provide a formal statement about what she witnessed. They were even sending a car for her. Chloe, stunned and overwhelmed, agreed. The avalanche was rolling, and it was bigger and faster than anyone could have ever imagined. The press conference was hastily arranged in a stately wood-paneled room at Chicago's City Hall. It was packed. Every local news station was there, their cameras jockeying for position. National news outlets, alerted to the involvement of a high-profile general and the Pentagon, had sent reporters. The air buzzed with anticipation and confusion. No one was entirely sure what this was about, only that it was big. Chloe Ramirez sat in a chair at the front of the room, feeling small and overwhelmed. A car had picked her up from the diner, and a kind woman from the mayor's office had offered her a bottle of water and told her she was very brave. She felt anything but brave. She felt terrified. Then, a side door opened, and Lieutenant Yates escorted a man into the room. The reporters murmured, their cameras flashing. It was Jeremiah Cole, but it was a Jeremiah transformed. He was no longer the disheveled, weary man from the alley. He was clean-shaven, his jawline sharp and defined. He was wearing a simple but perfectly tailored dark suit that hung on his frame with an air of authority. He moved with a quiet, powerful grace. His posture was ramrod straight. The stoicism that Chloe had seen in the alley was still there, but now it wasn't the dignity of a victim, it was the unshakable confidence of a leader. He took the seat next to Chloe and gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of gratitude. Seeing him, Chloe felt her own fear begin to recede, replaced by a surge of pride. A moment later, the main doors at the back of the room swung open. A wave of deference rippled through the crowd as two aides escorted an older man with silver hair and an undeniable aura of command toward the podium. The reporters recognized him instantly. It was General Douglas Hawthorne. He was greeted like royalty. City officials, including the police superintendent and the mayor herself, stood up respectfully as he passed. The general walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and scanned the room with eyes that had seen battlefields and war rooms. A hush fell over the reporters. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Good afternoon," he began. "Yesterday morning, a man was arrested in this city. He was treated not as a citizen, but as an inconvenience. He was mocked, he was humiliated, and his rights were violated. This man was homeless, but that is not his whole story." The general paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "This man is also a United States Army Master Sergeant. He is a decorated combat veteran who led men on more than 50 high-risk missions. He is a soldier who once orchestrated the rescue of an entire platoon, saving hundreds of American lives, for which he received the Distinguished Service Cross." A collective gasp went through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. The story had just become a national headline. "Yesterday," the general continued, his voice hardening, "a soldier who was once willing to give his life for his country was treated like trash on the streets of that same country." He gestured to a large screen that had been set up behind him. Suddenly, it flickered to life. A series of photographs flashed across the screen. There was Jeremiah in his full dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest. There was Jeremiah in Afghanistan, surrounded by his loyal squad. There was Jeremiah shaking hands with a senator. In the very back of the room, standing near the exit, was Officer Brad Mason. He had been ordered to attend. He was pale, his face slick with sweat. He looked at the powerful, heroic images on the screen, and then at the dignified man in the suit sitting at the front of the room. The two images refused to connect in his mind. He felt a wave of nausea. He looked like a man watching his own execution. General Hawthorne stepped away from the podium, and the mayor guided Jeremiah forward. He didn't gloat. He didn't show any anger. He simply looked into the sea of cameras, his gaze steady and clear. He spoke only a few words, but his voice was firm and resonated with a profound truth that silenced the entire room. "Respect costs nothing," Jeremiah said calmly, "but disrespect costs everything." The reporters were speechless. They had come expecting a story about police misconduct. They had found a story about honor, dignity, and a sleeping giant who had just been woken. The mayor stepped up to the podium, her expression grim and resolute. She announced that the city was issuing a formal apology to Master Sergeant Jeremiah Cole. She spoke of the debt owed to veterans and the sacred trust placed in law enforcement. Then she turned to the police superintendent. The air in the room grew thick with tension. Everyone knew what was coming next. This was the part of the story everyone had been waiting for. This was the reckoning. "As part of our commitment to accountability," the superintendent said, his voice leaving no room for doubt, "we are announcing immediate disciplinary action. This department will not, under any circumstances, tolerate the abuse of power or the violation of a citizen's civil rights." He looked out into the crowd, his eyes scanning the back of the room. "Officer Brad Mason, please come forward." A wave of murmurs swept through the press corps as cameras swiveled to find him. Mason froze, his face ashen. He looked like a trapped animal. He seemed to shrink, all his earlier bravado gone, replaced by pure, undiluted fear. Two senior officers moved to his side, their expressions stern, gently but firmly guided him toward the front of the room. He stumbled forward, his legs unsteady, until he was standing in the full glare of the camera lights, exposed and humiliated in front of the entire world. The superintendent looked directly at him. There was no sympathy in his eyes, only cold, official fury. Officer Mason, after a swift and thorough review of your conduct, including body camera footage and multiple eyewitness statements, it is the finding of this department that your actions were unprofessional, unnecessarily aggressive, and brought disgrace upon your badge and your fellow officers. Effective immediately, you are terminated from the Chicago Police Department. Fired. Publicly. In front of the cameras. A stunning, jaw-dropping moment of accountability. Mason's mouth fell open. He sputtered, his voice cracking. You can't do this. I have a union. I was doing my job. From his seat, General Hawthorne didn't even stand. He simply leaned forward and spoke, his voice quiet but carrying across the silent room with icy finality. I believe I already did. The words hit Mason harder than any physical blow. It was over. He had picked a fight with the wrong man, and the consequences were absolute. Defeated, he turned and stormed out of the room, shoving past cameras and reporters, his face a mask of rage and shame. The most satisfying part for the millions who would watch the clip online was the sound of the heavy doors slamming shut behind him. But the announcements weren't over. The mayor returned to the podium and smiled warmly at Chloe, who was watching everything with wide, disbelieving eyes. We also want to formally recognize the courage and moral clarity of a young woman who refused to stay silent in the face of injustice, she said. Ms. Chloe Ramirez, your actions are an inspiration. To honor your commitment to justice, the city and its private partners are proud to offer you a full-ride scholarship to study criminal justice at the University of Chicago. Chloe gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. A scholarship, a new life. It was more than she could have ever dreamed of. Finally, the mayor turned to Jeremiah. And Master Sergeant Cole, she said, her voice filled with respect. We cannot give you back what was taken from you yesterday, but we can offer you a new mission. The city would be honored if you would accept a senior position with our veteran outreach program, helping us reform our systems and ensure that no veteran in this city is ever treated this way again. The room erupted in applause. Jaws had literally dropped. Online, the comment sections exploded. People called it the most satisfying justice we've seen in years. It was more than just an officer getting fired. It was a complete reversal of fortune. The powerful had been brought low, and the humble had been raised up. It was a story for the ages. Weeks later, the dust had settled, but the city was irrevocably changed. On a once vacant lot on the west side, the sounds of construction filled the air. Hammers rang, saws whirred, and voices called out to one another with purpose and camaraderie. At the center of the activity was Jeremiah Cole. He wasn't wearing a suit anymore. He was in work boots, jeans, and a t-shirt, a tool belt slung around his waist. He was leading a team of young veterans, men and women who, like him, had struggled to find their place after their service. They weren't just building shelters for the homeless, they were building a community. They were building a new mission for themselves. Jeremiah moved among them, offering guidance, a quiet word of encouragement, a shared smile. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, resonant peace. He was a master sergeant again, leading his troops, bringing them home. Working beside him, a clipboard in her hand and a textbook on criminal justice sticking out of her backpack, was Chloe Ramirez. She was interning with Jeremiah's new program as part of her scholarship. The diner felt like a lifetime ago. She had found her calling not in serving coffee, but in serving justice. She and Jeremiah had formed a powerful bond, a friendship forged in the crucible of that gray morning in the alley. One sunny afternoon, a black car pulled up to the construction site. General Douglas Hawthorne stepped out, dressed in a simple polo shirt and slacks. He watched the scene for a long moment, a look of profound approval on his face. He walked over to Jeremiah, who had stopped to wipe the sweat from his brow. The general put a hand on his godson's shoulder. Told you, he said, his voice rumbling with affection. The world wasn't done with you yet. Jeremiah looked at the half-finished building, at the faces of the young vets working with a renewed sense of purpose. He looked at Chloe, who was laughing as she helped unload a truck of supplies. He had not just gotten his life back, he had found a better one. His story, once a source of shame and silence, was now his greatest strength. He was owning it, and in doing so he was showing others how to own theirs. He turned to the general, a genuine, brilliant smile spreading across his face for the first time in a very long time. "No, sir," Jeremiah said. It costs nothing to show respect, but for those who don't, it might just cost everything." If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.